Okay, let's look at the class. First of all, we have a package name that was automatically generated by NetBeans when we created the Person project. Let's look at the imports. Okay, the first two imports are associated with the Java list component. Java util list is the list interface, and array list is an implementation of that interface. The next four imports are associated with Java's new date time package. The class local date, which is immutable, replaces the class date, which was not immutable. And the last two classes are not used. If you hover your mouse over the little yellow warning light bulbs, you can see that. The first thing you see in this class is an inner class that is also an enumeration type. An inner class is simply a class that it's declared inside another class. An enumeration type is a type that contains a finite sequence of constants. The constants here are male and female. Variables of an enumeration type have to hold one of these constant values. So a variable declared to be of type sex has to have a value of male or female. However, an enumeration type is still a reference type. So enumeration variables could still be null. Simple enumeration types, like the one you see here, are always immutable. While it's theoretically possible for a programmer to create an enumeration type that is not immutable, it's not considered good programming. Also, even though the class you see here doesn't have any methods, enum classes can also have methods. You can add methods to this class if you want. Now let's look at the fields in the class. What do these fields have in common? Well, they don't have access modifiers like private, public, or protected. None of them are initialized, and all of them are reference types. But there's one other important property that all of these fields have. Can you see what it is? If you're not sure, please pause the video and see if you can figure out the important property that all of these fields have in common. Ready? Did you figure out what important property was common to all of these fields? Did you notice that they were all immutable? If you did, congratulations. String is immutable. Local date is immutable, even though the original date class was not. And sex, which is an enumeration type, is also immutable. Recognizing and understanding the distinction between mutable objects and immutable objects is one of the most important things you can learn in Java. One of the things that Joshua Block emphasizes in his book Effective Java is that you should make every class immutable unless there's a very good reason to make it mutable. Let's move on to the constructor. Like the fields, we don't see an access modifier. Argument names in with arg. In the body of the constructor, the arguments are simply assigned to the fields. So this is a very simple and straightforward constructor. The getAge method returns the age of the person. Notice that even though there are 3 lines here, there's really only one statement. Now that argument that you see inside the until method simply means today. So the period of time from a person's birthday until today, that's going to be a period or duration, and the number of years in that duration is what's returned. Let's talk about that argument in the until method. isochronology.instance.dateNow. To understand this argument, we have to understand what a singleton class is. You can think of a class as a blueprint for potentially many objects or instances. Well, a singleton class is one that creates only one single object or one single instance. In the past, a singleton class was implemented using a private constructor, and the constructor was called exactly once by the class itself, and then a private static variable would hold the singleton object that was constructed from that call. Users of the class could gain access to the object by calling a method named getInstance. That method would return a handle or a reference to that single object. Some programmers still use this technique to create singleton objects in Java, but a technique that has gained popularity is one in which the singleton is implemented as an enumeration type. Remember, an enumeration type lists a finite sequence of constants, and variables of that type have to have one of those constant values. Well, singleton enumeration types only have a single constant, and by convention, the name of that constant is instance. Therefore, anytime you see the name instance in uppercase letters, it's a pretty good bet that the class name it follows is a singleton class. In this case, isochronology is the singleton class, and dateNow is one of its methods. We won't spend a lot of time on printPerson method because it's pretty straightforward. It just prints the name, a comma, and the age of a person. The next four methods you see here are accessor methods. Accessor methods are either getters or setters. In this class, the person class, we only have getter methods. In general, getter methods should not modify the data in the class. That means you shouldn't write a getter method that forces the class to be mutable. For example, if your representation contained a private field that was an array, it would be a mistake to return a handle or reference to that array in a getter method. The reason is that the array is mutable. And if somebody from outside the class had a handle to that array, well, then they could modify the data inside the array, which would mean they were modifying the object itself. So think of getters as read-only. They provide you read access to some piece of information in the object, but they don't provide write access to that information. Write access can be provided by setter methods, and setter methods are intended to update information in the object, and therefore they're intended to mutate the object. That means that a class with setter methods will by necessity be a mutable class. Let's continue to the compareByAge method. This is a static method, which means it belongs to the class rather than to a specific object. It takes two persons as arguments and compares their birthdays. If person A was born before person B, then compareByAge returns a negative number. If person B was born before person A, then compareByAge returns a positive number. If they were born on the same day, compareByAge is going to return 0. Whenever you see the compareTo method, it means that the class of objects being compared implements the comparable interface. The comparable interface is what is known as a functional interface because it provides the signature of a single function or method. There are no other methods in the comparable interface. compareTo is the only one. When a class implements the comparable interface, it means that its objects can be easily sorted by the sort routines in Java's collection framework. So it's a good idea to implement the comparable interface if you can. Here's a question for you. Which of the three types, string, local date, and sex, implement the comparable interface? In other words, Which of these types have a compare to method? Does only one of them have it? Or are there two that have it? Or do all three have it? If you're not sure of the answer, please pause the video and find the answer. Okay, did you pause the video? What did you decide? Does string have a compare to method? Yes, strings can be compared. They can be sorted based on their alphanumeric ordering. What about local dates? Of course, these are the types that are used in the compare by age method. Finally, what about sex? Does sex implement a compare to method? The answer is yes. All enumeration types implement a compare to method. The order that enumeration constants are sorted in is the same order that they are declared in. For example, in this case, the constant male comes before the constant female because male was declared before female in the enum class. Finally, let's look at the create roster method. This method returns a list of person objects. Here, the list is going to hold Fred, Jane, George, and Bob. What I want to point your attention to in this method is the declaration of the roster variable. Roster is a list of persons. Notice that it is declared as a list of person, and it is defined or created using an array list with diamond notation. Diamond notation is just the angle brackets with nothing inside. Okay, I have several questions, and you don't need to pause the video for this. If you know the answers, great. If you don't, I'm just going to tell you. Okay, I've added a few alternative declarations here in the form of comments. My questions are going to be about these declarations. First question. Will the Java compiler allow you to declare a list without using any angle brackets? For example, instead of saying list of person roster equals new array diamond notation, can you say what you see here? List roster equals new array list. The answer is yes, you can. What does this mean? This means that you are not declaring a list of person, you are declaring a list of object. Do not do this. Generics were introduced into Java for a good reason. Make sure you use them. Second question, will the Java compiler allow you to declare roster as a list of person without using the diamond notation on the array list? In other words, can you say list of person roster equals new array list as we have here? The answer is yes, you can do that. What does this mean? This means that you are assigning an array list of objects to a list of persons. Do not do this. Again, generics were introduced for a reason. Use them. Third question. Will the Java compiler allow you to declare roster as a list of person and initialize it with an array list of person? The answer to this one, again, is yes, you can do that. In fact, before Java 1.6, you were required to do that. The diamond notation was introduced as a convenience to programmers. Some compilers will actually complain if you put anything inside the diamond. They'll give you a warning. Therefore, do not do this. Use the diamond notation. Finally, will the Java compiler allow you to declare roster as an array list of person and assign it an array list followed by diamond notation? Once again, the answer is yes, you can do that. What does it mean? It means that roster is an array list of person and may do some things that are not specified in the list interface. Do not do this. When an interface is available, use it. If we decided later to implement roster as a linked list rather than array list, it would be a lot simpler if roster was declared as a list in the first place. And just to show you quickly that the Java compiler does not complain, let's go through each of these in turn. Okay, we're finished commenting on the person class from the Java tutorial. Before we go, I have one final question for you. The question is this: is the person class that we see here, is this class immutable? Please pause the video and try to figure out if this person class is immutable. Ready? What did you figure out? Did you say it was immutable, or did you decide that it was not immutable? And the answer is the person class should be immutable, but it is not. And we're going to find out why in the next video when we begin to modify the person class. So let's take a break, and I'll see you there.